Call them today at 784-456-1170. People's Pharmacy also stock vitamins and supplements, personal care items, toiletries, children and adult pampers, and much, much more. And of course, get your prescriptions filled by a friendly and professional pharmacist. People's Pharmacy. Come in today and let us serve you.
Over to me. Good evening. This is Your Health Matters, and I'm really pleased to be back in St. Vincent on the program again today, Wednesday, 8 p.m. I apologize about last week. I was in Washington, D.C., at Capitol Hill, believe it or not. And maybe I'll talk about it another time, but the event seemed to have clashed with this show, and I couldn't really start up in time. But early in the week, I received a couple of questions on the subject of fiber. I wonder if people understand what fiber is. You know, you may know that there are different ingredients in foods. There's fat, there's protein, and there are carbohydrates. You know, we all know that. But carbohydrates are broken down into many different things. They're broken down into simple sugars, into more complex sugars. They're broken down into starches, and then there's all sorts of very, very complex starches called cellulose, right? Cellulose and other things like that. Now, if you look at the trunk of a tree is really made up of that stuff they call cellulose and so. Whereas, what you look to mix into your cup of tea, simple sugars, that's at the other end, right? They're all carbohydrates. But starches is not just like starch your clothes with or starch. They're broken down further. And some type of starches are what we call fiber. You know, that sounds interesting, eh? Fiber. Now, let me think. But there are two types of fiber. I want to explain this to you. There's what we call soluble fiber, and then there is what is also called insoluble fiber. Now, this is amazing. You see, where did all this come from? Soluble fiber, insoluble fiber. Well, I want you to kind of understand that soluble fiber is a type of fiber, and a number of different types of soluble fiber. When they mix with water, they absorb the water and they swell. They swell. Whereas insoluble fiber isn't affected by water at all. Water rushes off of them. They don't absorb water at all. They don't mix with water. And so there's no swelling of insoluble fiber. Let me go again. Soluble fiber absorbs water, mixes with water, and swells. When it swells, it forms like a little gel, you know, like a little foam. That's what it really is. Now, what I think is important to also get is that most plants contain both types of fiber. They contain soluble fiber, they contain insoluble fiber. Most plants, I would say, has about 70-80% of insoluble fiber, with about 20 to 30% of soluble fiber. But depending on which type of plant, that situation can change. You know? Now, grains have a lot of insoluble fiber. Grains. But fruits, berries, peas, oats, and barley, as you heard it, they contain a lot more soluble fiber. And depending on which fruit, which berry, they will contain different amounts. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, this is an important thing. The amount of soluble fiber you eat and how fast your food digests can have an impact on the amount of sugar in the food that is absorbed. I'm coming back to that in a minute. Let me say something else. In about 1960, there was a president in the United States called President Eisenhower. And he had a series of heart attacks. Kamal, he had a series of heart attacks. Why am I bringing up President Eisenhower? Because when he, as president, got heart attacks, a tremendous amount of research started going into why President Eisenhower had heart attacks and why some other people were beginning to have heart attacks. Well, they soon found out that a big reason was because of smoking. And they then found out that another reason they claimed was because of too much fat in the diet. Too much fat in the diet. So, believe it or not, they made a recommendation to cut out fat from the diet and to replace it with sugar. Come on, does that make sense? In 1965, the nutritional departments in the United States, followed by the rest of the world, suggested that to combat heart disease and heart attacks, you should cut out smoking, cut out the fat in your diet, and to replace it with sugar. Sugar was not considered a bad boy. Fat was considered a bad boy. So what did industry do? The manufacturing industry around the world, they came up with a solution to cut out fat out of food, and canned foods and other processed foods were now coming into play. There were images around the world of starving kids in India and Africa and Ethiopia. And so food production, processed food, ultra-processed food started coming in. And a lot of these foods had cut down on the fat, but they had increased on the amount of sugar. The reason why you need to increase sugar is that fat, do you know fat gives the food a little extra special taste. And it produces something called satiety. When fat goes down into your stomach, do you know it makes you feel better? It makes you feel good when it's being absorbed. That's why pork tastes so nice to many people, because the fat in pork produces satiety, gives you a level of satisfaction, unlike the other type of foods. But if they remove fat, they then had to do something to the food. They had to add more sugar, add sugar to get the taste up. And they should have groups of people tasting food And people liked and loved foods that had in extra added sugar. Now, there was one other part of the story. Besides cutting down fat, besides having to add sugar, to preserve food, you cannot have a lot of fiber in preserved foods. Fiber deteriorates quickly. Fiber doesn't have good shelf life. Fibers are kind of substances that will break down and will spoil your food and spoil the color. So by eliminating fiber from the diet, you have food that could sit on a shelf for 6 months and a year and still be good, still look good, probably still taste good because we've added sugar. So besides from the 1960s, 70s, we went to the 80s, besides food cutting down on the fat, the lipids, they also added more and more sugar to get the taste and the satiety back up that the fat used to provide. And then by doing so, by doing this process, inadvertently, almost deliberately, they reduce the amount of fiber in a diet. I don't know if people read, before 1960, diabetes was considered maybe to be the 40th or 50th largest killer in the world. It was low down. About a decade ago, diabetes entered the top 10 diseases that kill people. And it's now heading for one of the top 5 diseases of the world. Top 5. In the Caribbean, what has caused the growth of such things like diabetes? For a lot of reasons, but a lot of it is because we've not been eating as much fiber as we should. And 2, that we've been eating food with a lot of added sugar. There's a special added sugar. In 1980, after a lot of we call sugar wars, Cuba and Brazil and other countries that produce sugar was asking for more money for their workers, more money for the sugar. And there was like sugar shortages. They'd have plenty one year, shortages other year, because the countries were just like the oil companies were holding back on their sugar. And a Japanese guy, he invented a new type of sugar where they could use corn and treat the corn with some enzymes and make the corn, which had starch in it, break down the starch into sugar. And so they were able to create high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup. And guess what was special about high fructose corn syrup? It wasn't grainy that you could put into a sack of sugar. It was a liquid. High fructose corn syrup was a liquid. So you could put in a tank, and a company like Pepsi Cola could just turn on a knob and let the sugar run out into the Coca-Cola. And so they were able to use the switch from ordinary sugar to high fructose corn syrup. You think about sugar, ordinary sugar grains. When you put it into water, it doesn't always dissolve properly. You see some grains at the bottom? And in certain foods, like ketchup and those other things, it leaves some black stuff right at the top of the rim. You know, the sugar that's still there, the jams and so forth, it turns a little black. So it's hard for sugar to get dissolved. But high fructose corn syrup is already a liquid. So you mix it in with the Coca-Cola, mix it in with the fruit juices, mix it in, and it goes in quite well. So high fructose corn syrup started adding until we found out that your body could only use a certain amount of high fructose corn syrup. And after that fructose in that corn syrup, it goes crazy. It starts to do a whole set of things, a whole set of bad things. But this program is not about high fructose corn syrup. It's about fiber. And let me explain again what happens with fiber. When you eat foods that contain a good amount of fiber, it goes down into your stomach where it absorbs water. You hear that? Now, the soluble fiber, as it absorbs water, it swells. It swells, becomes foamy. And guess what else happens? It traps a fair amount of the sugar in it. It traps the sugar in it. It traps some cholesterol. And it prevents those things from being absorbed. Isn't that strange? Let me say this again because it's a difficult thing to understand. When you eat foods that are high in soluble fiber, as the soluble fiber in your food goes down, it mixes with the food, fiber mixes with the food, right? And the fiber somewhat absorbs water and swells to form like a little foam. And that foam traps sugar that hasn't been absorbed yet. It traps cholesterol that hasn't been absorbed yet. And so inside your stomach and the next phase in your small intestine, the first part, small intestine, the amount of sugar that is absorbed and the amount of cholesterol that's absorbed is reduced. Isn't that strange? Now, if you don't eat foods with high amount of soluble fiber, the food goes down. There's very little swelling. There's no trapping of the sugar, no trapping of the cholesterol. So even right in your stomach, guess what? The sugar starts to be absorbed in your first part of your small intestines. You know, sugars, again, rapidly absorbed. There's nothing to stop it. There's no foamy, soluble fiber to trap it and to keep it inside the stomach. Instead, it is free. And you might say, man, let the sugar go free. Let the sugar go free. Let the cholesterol go free. But would you believe that long ago, our ancestors, our foreparents, they were eating foods that had in good amounts of soluble fiber. And therefore, they were not absorbing sugar at this high rate. They weren't promoting diabetes. And that is what the rapid absorption of sugar inside your stomach and your small intestine does. It promotes diabetes. The reason why, there are some foods we know as having high glycemic index. I know I'm throwing out a technical term for you. What that means, is that as soon as you eat those foods, as soon as it hits your stomach, the sugar inside of it is being absorbed. Whereas foods with low glycemic index, they don't cause a spike in your blood sugar. Foods with high glycemic index, as soon as they hit your stomach and your small intestine, they absorb, and the amount of sugar that gets into your blood is so high. We call them high glycemic index foods. Diabetics should not eat a lot of those foods. They should be eating low glycemic index foods. The foods that when you eat and hit your stomach and small intestine, the sugar is not being absorbed. And most of the time, low glycemic index foods have in a good portion of soluble fiber. That's the message I'm trying to put out to you. Soluble fiber, we have now realized, is critical to the control and the onset of diabetes. People who have genetics in their family to develop diabetes. And they did not notice they were eating a ton of food that had high glycemic index, and their blood sugar was running high. And people who are diabetic who don't understand sometimes about the diet, they too are eating foods and wonder, boy, but I'm eating good foods. I understand these are good foods, but why is my sugar still high? Why am I having to take more insulin? Why am I having to increase my tablets and other things like that? The reason why is that you are not eating the right type of foods. You know, you're not eating the right type of foods at all, if I could put it this way. Now, let me go through certain foods. But before that, I was mentioning soluble fiber. Insoluble fiber, what that does is that insoluble fiber passes through your intestine. It doesn't absorb water. It doesn't swell. And when it gets into some of the last part of your intestine, guess what? It provides bulk to your stool. It provides bulk to your stool so that you could move your bowels properly. If you are eating any fiber, soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, boy, you're going to become constipated. You are going to develop bloating and bulk and so and all that kind of thing. And so by having fiber, it also helps to exercise your intestines. Now, your intestines, your large intestine in particular, has muscles. A lot of people don't know that. It has muscles in your large intestine, and they need to work out. When they work out good, they can move the stool along and you can go to the bathroom nicely. You sit down on the toilet bowl and you pass things out. You repel it. You pass it out. Whereas if you have to sit down there for half an hour and somebody knocking at the door, you finish. You come out. Especially if you're on a plane or something like that. And your bowels are slow movers and you can't get it out because the muscles in your large intestine weren't getting a lot of exercises. You were not eating fiber foods with good set of insoluble fiber. It takes so much time. You got to push. It's like having a baby. It's just that the baby coming out your back passage. You know what I mean? Can I say that? Come on. You know, I said it already. You know, and guess what? It's horrible, especially if you're under pressure, especially if you're in a large family and other people all go work and they basically are waiting for you to come out of the bathroom. That's why it's good sometimes to have more than one bathrooms and so forth, you know? But that's an affordability question. So, now I haven't finished telling you all the story about fiber. Fiber, I've just pointed out to you, number one. Inside the stomach and the first part of the small intestine, soluble fiber swells and helps to reduce the absorption of sugar, limiting the amount of sugar that's absorbed. So you don't get a huge spike. You only get a small amount of sugar being absorbed. That small amount, your insulin in your body can handle it. When you're in situations that you have large, high peaks of sugar being absorbed, the amount of insulin in your body just may not be enough. And so therefore, that sugar hangs around for a long time inside your blood, yeah, because it has at a high peak. I also mentioned that there is insoluble fiber that when it reaches the large intestine, it produces a workout for your muscles of your small intestine. And that helps to move the stool along so that it can be evacuated and you can number two very nice and easily without bulk or without constipation, without all those other things. But there's another important function of fiber. Now, do you know that animals like cattle have 4 stomachs? Do you know? Yeah, cattle have like 4 stomachs. Sheep, goat, all of them have 4 stomachs. The reason why is they have this extra stomach where enzymes can break down grass and the cellulose. You know that they can eat plants and they can turn the carbohydrates that's inside that plant into sugar. Well, the way the Lord made us, we don't have that extra stomach, and that our stomachs, and that our single stomach doesn't have the enzyme to break down grass. So if you eat grass, right, or you eat bush, I'm not saying if you eat lettuce and cabbage and so forth, you will get something out of those. But I'm saying to you that ordinary grass and bush, we cannot digest them. If you live on a diet of grass and bush, you will get into some serious trouble because you would hardly be getting the right amount of nutrients from that. Now, why I've said this is that the fiber inside these foods, grass and so forth, you still need a certain amount, because do you know what's occupying most of your intestines? What's inside your intestines? There are a lot of bacteria inside there. You know? What if you realize there's a lot of germs inside your intestines? But these germs are good germs. These germs are friendly germs. These germs are your personal germs. They're your germs. They're your good germs. And they need food too. They need to be fed. Guess what they love to eat? They love to eat fiber. Fiber is what helps the good germs to survive. Now, if you ain't eating a lot of fiber, guess what? The good germs in your intestine start to die out. They die out and they're replaced by some bad germs, germs that do not do the right job. Germs that do not do the right job. Now, remember I was saying that the fiber coats the stomach, mixes in, absorbs some of the sugar, absorbs some of the carbohydrates and things like that, and prevents the absorption of sugar. Well, when that fiber reaches into the intestine, right, it provides food for your bacteria. If you don't have that fiber, boy, crap will smoke your pipe. The bacteria start to do some strange things. The bacteria needs food, so it starts to eat away at other material on the lining of your intestine. We call it mucin. It eats that. But mucin is like a lubricant, a barrier to prevent the bacteria from getting in. The long and short of it, without fiber, germs start to get into your intestinal cells and cause inflammation. You don't want that. So people who don't have a high fiber diet, they start to get inflammation in their intestine. They start getting cramps and bloating and germs causing inflammation. They start getting inflammatory bowel disease. That isn't a good thing. But let me talk about foods. Now, there are foods like black beans. Black beans that the Spanish eat. You go to Colombia, you go to Mexico, you go to El Salvador, Honduras, you go to any of these places. Spanish people have learned about black beans, and they are a great source of soluble fiber. They're having some important soluble fiber, one called pectin, in these black beans. And boy, this soluble fiber is good. Another good high fiber food is lima beans. We used to have lima beans here, and the Caribs loved lima beans. Lima beans have gone out, but lima beans are native to the Caribbean. Lima beans, also known as buffer beans. Remember I say they serve to buffer and absorb and stop absorption of sugar? They're called buffer beans. They're large, flat, greenish white beans, and they basically having about 5.3 grams of fiber for each, like in a 3/4 cup of lima beans. You cook a 3/4 cup of fiber, they will have about 5.3 grams, which is a great amount of soluble fiber. Then kidney beans. You heard of kidney beans? All these beans sound like alike. You know, lima beans and kidney beans, the black beans, they all look like kidney beans to me. They have a shape. But kidney beans, they also they have about 3 grams of fiber, soluble fiber for each 3/4 cup of. Now, there's some vegetables like Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts, we don't tend to get a lot of that down here, but Brussels sprouts are great. They got 2 grams of soluble fiber, and it's undeniable that this vegetable is packed with vitamins and minerals, along with various other cancer-fighting agents. Brussels sprouts are definitely a great source of fiber as well, besides all these other things. And if you could grow them, they tend to grow more in temperate countries. Now, I start to hit another big one. Sweet potato. 10, 15 years ago, nutritionists would have told everybody, stay away from sweet potato because of the word sweet. Diabetes, don't take no sweet potato. What I'm saying to you, sweet potato are a root vegetable high in potassium, beta carotene, B vitamins, and fiber, especially right underneath the skin. It's good with sweet potato. You don't peel it. If you roast it and then that roast it, you can do a little thing with the, brush the skin to make it nice and clean and everything like that. But cook it with the skin. Cook it with the skin. Bake it with the skin. Roast it with the skin. Because just underneath the skin, that's where a lot of the soluble fiber is. And that's what you want. That's what you want. You know what I mean? If I could put it that way, that's what you want. You understand? And just one medium-sized sweet potato is packed with about 400% of the daily requirement of vitamin A, right? More, this has about has 1.8 grams of fiber for 1 cup, 1/2 cup of sweet potato. In other words, that's one sweet potato, right? Will give you about 1.8 grams. And guess what? About 50% of the fiber in sweet potato is soluble. 50%. Half is insoluble, half is soluble. Now, broccoli, like if we mention Brussels sprouts or broccoli, we get broccoli here, right? Broccoli is great, good, just as good as the Brussels sprout. Broccoli is a good source of dietary fiber, and you could get about 1.5 grams for just 1 cup of broccoli. That's really good. Yeah? Cauliflower is also great, but guess what? We don't have a lot of cauliflower down here because it's hard to grow in here, and you could buy it from the store and all that kind of thing and so forth. But you got to get broccoli. Then we don't have turnips either, but we got carrots. Now, carrots are one of the most popular and tasty vegetables on earth. Boiled or steamed carrots are a key ingredient in many recipes. Now, carrots are packed with what we call beta carotene. That's what gives them the orange color. And some of this is converted to vitamin A, as you know. But 1 cup of chopped carrots contains a fair amount of fiber, 2.4 grams per cup. 2.4 grams a cup. Now, the fruits, the big fruit, big one, avocados. Avocados, which are native to the Caribbean, native to St. Vincent. 1 avocado is packed with about 13.5 grams of soluble fiber. This is big. An avocado, you take a quarter of an avocado, a few slices, you have done yourself justice in terms of, the soluble fiber. Figs too, there's a fruit called figs, nectarines, apples, and let me come to guavas. Guavas are a tropical fruit native to the Americas, Mexico. 1 guava packs about 3 grams of soluble fiber. That's really about 1.1 grams per raw guava. 1 guava contains 1.1 grams of soluble fiber. When I order mango vegetables, I think about 3 or 4. I get my soluble fiber from guava. That's where I get mine from. You can also get it from nuts, flax seeds, sunflower seeds, hazelnuts, and you get some from grain and barley. I've mentioned that. Now, I've gone through that list real quick because, I want to open up in case anybody want to ask any questions. But let me just recap. Soluble fiber are so important. A lot of the foods, like when we get relief and we get foods coming up from Canada and America, these are predominantly ultra-processed foods. Foods in cans, foods in packages and so forth, meant to last 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. They've taken out the fiber so that the food could have a long shelf life. Fiber, soluble fiber is found in really fresh foods. Vincentians love fresh. We love fresh fish. We love fresh food. We don't like frozen fish, do we? Come on. You like frozen fish? No, Vincentians love many other parts of the world, what they eat is frozen fish. We love fresh fish. But more important, we love fresh food. And I'm trying to point out to you that a lot of the food that we get for relief programs, the stuff that comes in, it either has in a whole ton of high fructose corn syrup or it has very little fiber in it. That means that when you eat food, the food that doesn't have in a lot of fiber will cause a spike in your blood sugar, and diabetics is going to throw off your diabetes management. On the other hand, if you are eating foods with a high amount of fiber, this goes a long way. This goes a long way. And many diabetics don't realize this. Over the years, they're wondering why their sugar isn't controlled, why, this is happening to them and why that is happening to them. A big part of it is that they did not include enough soluble fiber in their diet. I've made a distinction between soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Both are good for you. The soluble fiber absorbs water, swells, traps some of the sugar, traps some of the cholesterol in your diet, and prevents you from having a big spike in your sugar, throwing off the control of your diabetes. Because you can't control diabetes if every morning you eat, your sugar going up high. Then it drop down low and then going up high again when you eat and going up. You can't control sugar. So you have to eat foods that having a high amount of soluble fiber so that the amount of sugar getting into your blood is just modest, moderate. That means the insulin you're taking or the tablets you're taking to control your blood sugar is able to have the effect of keeping your sugar down. You understand? Making sure the sugar that gets into your blood is absorbed into your tissue so that your tissue could work. But when you have these huge spikes, your tissue can't absorb all that sugar one time. And when that sugar gets into your blood and make it all syrupy, tick, syrupy sugar in your blood, and that's happening every day, every hour of the day. High sugar levels, syrupy blood. Boy, that syrupy blood ain't nice. It acts like a kind of a rust inside your body, causing rust inside the back of your eye, causing glaucoma, causing rust in your kidneys, affecting your kidneys, inside your heart, inside other reproductive parts of your body that I won't talk about, and it causes a lot of problems. And so, this stuff is really important. Now, I want to, we didn't take a break, did we? We take a quick break and we come back. Yeah.
People's Pharmacy, for all your pharmaceutical, skin and body care needs. Located on Grenville Street in Kingstown. They open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Saturday. Call them today at 784-456-1170. People's Pharmacy also stock vitamins and supplements, personal care items, toiletries, children and adult pampers, and much, much more. And of course, get your prescriptions filled by a friendly and professional pharmacist. People's Pharmacy. Come in today and let us serve you.
Yes. Now, there are some fruits. I mentioned to you just now guava. I mentioned you avocados. These are excellent, high soluble fiber, great for diabetics. And even just one guava a day could go a long way. One guava a day could go a long way. But there are some other fruits that you have to be very careful about, You have to be very careful about them. And first of all, foods like rice, dairy alone, baked goods, they do not have a lot of fiber inside them. Tender meat, even fish, poultry, ham, bacon, they don't have any fiber. Shellfish, they don't have any fiber in them. And I'm saying this, that these foods are still good foods. So you have to make sure you add the fiber to these foods. Now, fruits, like apples. We have apples down here. Apples are not grown here. You have to buy them, but they seem to be in abundance. But they seem to have a fair amount of fiber in them, soluble fiber, right? And I think what I'm really getting at is that, like a banana has a lot of potassium in it and is good to help control your high blood pressure, but it doesn't have a lot of fiber in it, truthfully. Mangoes, on the other hand, there can be some mangoes that have a high amount of sugar, and they also tend to have a low amount of fiber. So diabetics, these are two things you may want to control a little better. Bananas, mangoes, maybe even melons and cantaloupes, right? They may not have as much fiber in them as you might think. Do you know the foods with the highest amount of fiber? Do you know the foods with the highest amount of fiber? You'll be surprised, right? Kamal, can you know what that might be? The fruits with the highest amount of fiber. Well, believe it. Huh? Oh, you didn't check. We didn't have the yeah. We didn't have the text thing up to check. Anything? Yeah. Fruit with the highest amount of fibers are some of the berries, raspberries, mulberries. You know, they have a substantial amount of fiber in them, and you know, I've been quite surprised by that in terms of the foods with the highest amount of fiber. What foods we also need is a food called fig. I have a fig tree. You've got a fig tree? Yeah? Yeah, figs are actually quite nice, but we don't tend to see them a lot here in the Caribbean. They are not, I wouldn't say they're not native to the Caribbean. Figs actually have been around, but the amount of soluble fiber there is quite good, but what I would recommend is avocados. Having a nice ripe avocados and having one that you can slice and put back in the fridge, and you take about 2 or 3 slices on a daily basis is going to be excellent. That will give you, if you have planted a guava tree and they tend to be seasonal, go in with guavas, slicing them up and so, and having at least a guava a day or every other day is really going to be absolutely fine. And that's local. It may be more difficult to get some of the berries and so, because these things are a little more expensive. Apples are also imported, but I tend to think that these things are critical to your diet. So we've learned a lot about fiber over the years. It's taken too long to learn about them. And over the last, I would say, 50 years, the recommendations to diabetics have been confusing. Yeah. Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Camille.
Yes, how are you?
We're talking to something I haven't heard you talk
I'm
about
hearing
is
it.
beetroot.
You were hearing what?
I say, I haven't heard you spoke about beetroot. I love my beetroot.
Yes. Beetroot is one of...
I'm not hearing you so well.
You're not hearing me? Are you hearing me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. Beetroot is one of the best foods out. Now, we're talking about fiber. And beet may have a moderate amount. It may be good for you. But it is actually better for something else. Beetroot, about the year 2000, well, 1998, we discovered that in your body, there is some substance called nitric oxide that is being produced. it's a good substance. And it helps to control your blood pressure. But the nitric oxide is also important for, I've got to say this on radio, for having an erection. You understand? It helps to stimulate an erection. And people who have low nitric oxide levels, they tend to have problems with, I don't want to use the word raising the dead, but they have problems in terms of effective erections. Now, this nitric oxide level is also important with your stomach and also important with Alzheimer's. Believe it or not, the way the drug Viagra works is to boost your nitric oxide levels. That's what it does. Now, the food that naturally boosts nitric oxide is, guess what? The best food for boosting your nitric oxide, guess what it is? Is beet. Beet, either sliced or in the form of a juice, and apparently it's felt that juicing the beet is better than slicing, slightly better, but it is great here in the crib. I have a few beet plants, and so it's difficult to grow, but a lot of people have been growing it now, but it needs to become more popular in the Caribbean. And the beet, the nitric oxide, works by not only helping to control your blood pressure, but also helps to control your diabetes too. I'm saying it in funny. Now, it doesn't control it in the way that it has soluble fiber in it. It helps to control your diabetes through a different mechanism. You understand? So as you mentioned beet, I may not have mentioned it as I'm talking about fiber, but when you asked that question, I said, Mr. Mason knows something that a lot of other people don't know. Mr. Mason knows something that a lot of other people don't know, and he put me on the spot to talk about beet. Yes, sir? When I was talking more about fiber, and so you seem to know a lot more about it. You seem to have read up on some of this stuff, man. You know what I mean? All right. Thank you very much. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Yes. I think one of the main points I was making is that you can have diabetes and be looking to control it with the tablets and with the injections and so that you have. Let's take this other call. Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Thompson. And
Hey,
how are you?
not too bad. Not too bad.
Yes, I listened in its entirety, and thank you very much. Yes.
Yes. Well, I tried to do some justice. I knew that you told me to speak
Yes,
about
the
it.
volume down.
Yes. Fiber is something that we still haven't caught on to. And people don't know enough about it. And they don't know how important it is. And as I said, the difference between soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, what they do. But these things serve multiple functions. And I'm glad you asked me to talk about it and to really, there's a lot more we could say about fiber, but within the time frame, I wanted to fit it in this time frame,
But I tell you, Dr. Thompson, I don't like the Brussels sprout. I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I know it's good, but
Yeah.
I can't stand. And Mr. Mason, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
The beetroot, I don't like it cooked, but I juice it like I'll have it 3 times a week. I juice it with the beets,
Yes.
cucumber,
Uh-huh.
a little carrot, a
Yes.
piece of turmeric, a
Yes.
piece of ginger, and a peg of garlic. And I put a pinch of black pepper in it because it is said that the
Increase
black
the
pepper
absorption.
helps to absorb the turmeric.
The
and
turmeric,
the
yes.
stomach digest it better.
Yes.
So I'll have that 3 times a week. But Coke, I don't like it. But I didn't hear you mention blueberries. It is said that blueberries are good for diabetes.
Well, but you know
People with
something.
diabetes,
You
so-
remember I said some of the best fruit with the highest fiber is actually the berries. And you're absolutely right. The blueberries, the raspberries, the blackberries, all these. Blueberries is really at the top of that particular list because
Exactly, yes. Because I go more for the blueberries.
yes. And you know why you go more for the blueberries? Because you are in a blueberry zone, right?
Well, right, I know.
So
Yes.
blueberries grow best in that northern part of the United States and in Canada. And there are varieties that grow, but blueberries don't grow so well down here in the Caribbean.
I know that. yes,
So
that
so in terms of the audience, telling people about blueberries, they have to get frozen
Well, I only
blueberries.
talk about it because I'm here.
I know. But there is something called mulberries. Matter of fact, Mr. Mason, going up wrong Palmyra, going up, there's raspberries up there, you know, and there's mulberries and things like that you could get here in St. Vincent. These are black mulberries, but we need to promote the berries much more, and it'll go a long way, you know.
And there's another thing that I'll ask you about, sir. I wouldn't have because somebody else might like to come. There is that thing we used to call it in St. Vincent, Cooley pumpkin. It be on the Carolina thing, you know what I'm talking about? But gosh, they have a name for it here. That is very good for diabetes too.
Yes, you're talking about bitter melon, right?
Bitter melon. That's
Bitter
what we
melon.
call it up here.
Well, let
Or
me.
we call it Cooley pumpkin.
You call it Cooley pumpkin, Carolina. You know,
Yes.
It's cerisi. It's called cerisi in Jamaica.
Yes.
You know,
Saucy,
cerisi, or however you
That's
pronounce
what-
it.
that's what they
Jamal,
call it,
we always at the end of the program. I need to be at the end of the program. But
Yeah,
listen,
I know. Okay, I understand.
bitter melon is I was gonna say it's a big bad fruit, but I want to say it in a way it is powerful, and I'm gonna have to talk
Yes.
about it some other time because bitter melon is big, and I could tell you a little bit more about the history of bitter melon, all right? And
So you'll write that down.
I write it down. I don't have a good time.
I usually chop it up with like onions and stuff
Well,
like
boy,
that, and you stew
grow-
it up and
It
That's
grows
how
in
I-
everybody's backyard, but they don't eat it here. You know?
because I didn't know at that home until when I get here. I know how powerful it is. I have
Yeah.
a girlfriend. She just soak it in the water.
Soak
and
it in
drink
water.
Yes. Okay. So
Good night.
I'll go.
Good night.
Good night, Kamal.
All right,
Get home
darling.
safe. Take
Sure.
care.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you
yeah.
very much, sir. Bye.
Well, folks, it is time for me. I'm past time. Sorry, I apologize. I'm going over the time for the show. Good evening and good night. Eat your soluble fiber. Bye.
People's Pharmacy for all your pharmaceutical, skin and body care needs. Located on Grenville Street in Kingstown. They open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Saturday. Call them today at 784-456-1170. People's Pharmacy also stock vitamins and supplements, personal care items, toiletries, children and adult pampers, and much, much more. And of course, get your prescriptions filled by a friendly and professional pharmacist. People's Pharmacy. Come in today and let us serve you.
Life is meant to be an open celebration, not enslavement to addictions, human traditions, or mediocrity. Are you living abundantly?
Health of our society, the future and health of our homes depends largely on